The PS3 and 360 era is one of the greatest in gaming history and one of my personal favorites. With so many great games, it's only natural that some would fly under my radar. One of these said games was Bioshock Infinite. You see, I played the original Bioshock back in the day as a kid. I can still remember the incredible atmosphere of rapture and the unforgettable story. Despite really enjoying the first title, I never actually returned to the series. However, fans over the years have cited that the franchise does have worthy sequels. This brings me to Bioshock Infinite, which released in 2013. Despite being a hyped release at the time, I was too busy to play the game and then shortly after, moved to the PlayStation 4. For years, I've had to hear gamers sing the praises of the title. So, after more than a decade later, I wanted to return to the series and see if Bioshock Infinite was really as good as they claimed. Before we discuss though, make sure to like this video, and this should go without saying, but spoiler warning. Bioshock Infinite puts the players in the shoes of Booker DeWitt, a former Pinkerton who loves drinking and gambling, clearly a barstool guy. Booker is a textbook broken and reluctant hero. After drowning himself in whiskey-flavored shame, he's tasked with bringing back the girl. If he's successful, his debts will be forgiven. I personally liked the setup. I liked the air of mystery that surrounded the main plot. Another thing I liked was the technical prowess of the game. You see, the game came out at the end of the PS3 lifetime, with the PS4 launching at the end of 2013. Sure, there were still games being released for the PS3 in the following years, but I think we all knew it was time to move on and to upgrade. Considering this, I think the game ran relatively well, considering I was playing on a PS3 with composite cables, hence why my footage has the graphical fidelity in single digits. There were moments though that I noticed the truly atrocious loading times of the PS3. You don't realize how spoiled we are as modern gamers until you go back and load anything. By the time the main menu loads, you've already lost interest and have watched your kids grow into adulthood. These terrible loading times plagued my time with Infinite, especially later in the game where sometimes the game needed a good 10 to 15 seconds to load, all while in the middle of an area or combat. I don't blame the game, however. I just think it was pushing the hardware as far as it could go. Again, the PS3 was on its last leg. You could tell that it took every bit of the PS3's power to fully realize Infinite's incredible designs. Just look at Columbia. It's part Art Deco, part Diesel Punk, part Aeropunk. The beautiful angelic city in the clouds not only has some of the best art direction in gaming history, but also stands out graphically on the PS3. It's truly astounding that some games today still don't capture the majesty and spectacle of a game over a decade old. So many games today focus on differentiating biomes that they kind of forget to make a cohesive living cityscape. Columbia, despite some preferences to Rapture, is still a stunning world that delighted me from first sight. At moments, this game feels like art direction porn, just with less lubricants. I found myself being annoyed by enemies because I wanted to focus on the environment. Another key factor in me enjoying the atmosphere was the music. Bioshock Infinite has a fantastic OST that really helps soak you into the world. Personally, I loved the battle tracks that helped set up the scenes from rooftops to nighttime courtyards. Additionally, the game actually licensed real-world tracks and did era-appropriate covers. That means as you roam, you can hear Bioshock Infinite's rendition of Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. I think these are all amazing, and when you get into the story, it all starts to make sense. Because of the music and beautiful art direction, the game hooked me from its opening. Arriving in Columbia, you are greeted by candles, heavy religious motifs, and the beautiful elegance of the city. Seeing the city for the first time is like a come-to-Jesus moment. The game greets you with this charm that feels infectious, inviting you to play in this early 20th century charade. Booker plays along as long as he can, however, things turn to shit, and now it's time to arm yourself. At your disposal is a combination of firearms and figures, essentially left-handed magic, a staple of the franchise. Overall, as I fought the police through the opening chapters, I quite liked the gunplay. I found it odd that I needed to click the stick in to aim down the sights, but overall, I thought the aiming was solid and the guns were responsive. Your arsenal of weapons is quite diverse as you continue throughout the story. Pistols, a sniper rifle, machine guns, RPGs, and my personal favorite, the hand cannon. I really like the turn-of-the-century design of the weapons. Once again, Bioshock knocks the art direction out of the park. While the gunplay is polished and features some vital upgrade options, the inability to carry multiple weapons really holds combat back. You see, you can only carry 2 firearms at a time. The game doesn't feature a weapon wheel. Personally, I felt this made combat limited in some areas, because it felt like you never had the weapon you needed. At times, the games will throw you clusters of enemies that would be perfect for a shotgun, or snipers on distant rooftops. When these things do happen, if you don't have the right weapon, it can make these engagements less fun. Now, plenty of games have a weapon limit, I just seem to notice it more with Infinite. What's odd is that your Vigors have a selection wheel, but your weapons do not. Speaking of Vigors, I think they are the highlight of combat because of their versatility. Despite only featuring 8 base Vigors, the variety in their abilities ensures that regardless of playstyle, every player should have a Vigor that suits their style. In my opinion, this is the very reason that makes Vigor so appealing. Want to use your undertow and pull enemies closer for a shotgun blast? You can do that. Want to place a murderous trap of crows so you can perch and snipe? Again, the Vigors really let you master your preferred style of combat. Each Vigor has multiple uses, multiple upgrades, and is a highlight in combat for sure. Another wrinkle to combat is the various skylines that connect the floating city. Armed with your skyhook, you can traverse the lines, shooting and pouncing on helpless victims. Despite the breakneck speed hurting my aim, I personally loved the skylines. It felt like a chaotic roller coaster to hell. It was fun riding the lines, aimlessly maneuvering around the big open areas. The lines also give the entire game a greater sense of verticality, which is sorely missing for most first-person shooters. You could take a line to a rooftop vantage point perfect for sniping, or use them to get in close with your hand cannon. Overall, I felt the lines added a greater sense of movement to the game, and Booker as a character. Can it get a little hectic, a bit too fast? Sure, but I like the added chaos. Despite the greater sense of movement, I did find that the world space itself was limited in some ways beyond the stunning visuals. Because the world and art direction is so damn beautiful, I found myself wanting to explore. However, Bioshock Infinite isn't an open world game, and it doesn't have engaging exploration in my opinion. Some areas feel massive and open to the player, but contain very little for you to actually find. Sure, your searches might produce lockpicks or more eagles, but after a dozen hours, I found myself getting tired of finding audio logs and money that I no longer needed. I wish the game had more open-ended exploration, similar to Prey or Dishonored, which would have let players engage more with the world and the fantastic tracks. Because of the massive openness of the setting, I found myself wanting freedom, much like Elizabeth. You see, with our previous games, and more specifically Rapture, the player was confined, trapped by the sea. There was no escape. It felt confined by intention, so it made sense for the game to be claustrophobic and linear. With Columbia, the cityscape is open amongst the clouds, which naturally makes the player want to hop the skylines and explore, only to find areas with barriers on all sides. You are just as confined, despite being in the literal open clouds. Was this the dev's intention, to make us feel as caged as Elizabeth? Perhaps. Speaking of Elizabeth, I personally found her to be the star of the game. As Booker, we fight our way through the city and manage to find Elizabeth in her tower, kept locked away under constant surveillance. As you fight to free her, the game creates these tense moments as you still aren't sure who to trust and what the truth even is. Despite the uncertainty, my goal remained the same: get this sweet woman out of this racist, twisted, and downright evil place. Along the way, however, our escape became muddled by obstacles, including our airship being stolen and forced into the middle of a literal uprising. These moments do create narrative tension, however, within the greater scheme of the narrative, they start to feel meaningless. For example, we spend multiple chapters trying to rescue a gunmaker named Chen. Despite multiple chapters of effort, he dies, making everything we did meaningless. Our characters and story continue on anyway, making me question if we ever really needed the character. He isn't missed, important, or interesting. Other characters pop up, making you think they will become important, but in the end, they just act as temporary chapter hurdles and are mostly forgotten by the end credits. When the game focused on Booker, Comstock, and Elizabeth is when the game was at its best, in my opinion. Sure, highlighting religious extremism and racism adds a layer of depth to Columbia, but these feel inconsequential to the greater narrative. What saves these moments for me, though, is the gameplay. I can forgive these moments because it's another reason to murder clan members with crows, which always feels good. Watching white sheets turn brown in fear is always satisfying. Now, along the way, you start to piece more and more of the story together and things become clear. Elizabeth, she ain't normal. You see, she's able to distort reality and create tears as she calls them. These are actual portals to alternate dimensions and timelines. Throughout the game, Elizabeth is able to use her powers to assist you. She can bring forward medkits, cover, or even temporary allies. Unlike most damsels in distress and escort companions, Elizabeth is far from useless. She gives you ammo, money, health, and never gets in your way. Just compare her to Ashley from RE4, you won't accidentally shoot Elizabeth or pray for her painful demise. I also really liked her character. I felt sympathetic toward her and her desire for freedom. You see, she only dreams of escaping her cage. As you progress the story, you realize that she's lived a loveless life, one of pain, seclusion, and mystery. She doesn't know why she's different or why she's feared. She's been hated by her mother and controlled by her father. Speaking of her father, Comstock makes for a devilishly good villain. While his motives for creating this cloud utopia are vague at the start, his religious extremism becomes apparent. His justifications for racism, limited workers' rights, and sexism are downright disturbing. He's intimidating, yet not in the conventional sense. He isn't going to rival you in power level or atomic drop you from the heavens. He isn't a threat physically. He's more like a Charles Manson cult leader able to seduce the feeble-minded. This guy could poison the minds of the masses with a children's book. Drop him in any small town across rural America, and he could have a rally going by midnight. As you play, it becomes clear that in order to stop this sick sumbitch, it meant going through wave after wave of loyal servants that were disturbed and demented. I felt pity for these brainwashed people that had been seduced by a dark faith and serpent disguised as a savior. My pity didn't last long though, it's either them or me. But just seeing the lengths he will go to is insane. Everything controlled, everything disturbed. The level of brainwashing he's done to these people is actually impressive and deserves respect in the darkest sense. Even the people that stand against him are unable to act logically and take their rebellion to the extreme, killing innocents and eventually turning on me. Despite having issues that are black and white, no pun intended, the game shows that the citizens of Columbia are just insane, regardless of political ideology or alternate timelines. Everyone has been radicalized by Comstock and his massive influence. He's made himself and his departed wife martyrs, which makes Booker and Elizabeth's escape all the more deadly. Not only do we fight clan members, police, and crazed rebels, but we also fight some of the more unique enemy designs that the game has to offer. One of my personal favorites is the motorized Patriots. Essentially, they are massive president-themed robots armed with crank guns fueled by propaganda. Then you have big dudes, crow dudes, flamethrower dudes, plus the countless automated enemies. I personally really like the enemy designs and how they functioned. When surrounded by Patriots, RPGs, and grunts, the game can turn insane rather quickly, forcing you to adapt or die. This brings us to the final act where all truths are revealed. You see, as we've progressed, we've witnessed oddities across Columbia. These anomalies become more and more apparent, especially when we run into the twins who hint the entire game at the larger reveals. I personally loved their witty banter throughout the game and found them whimsical in the best ways. They seem to know more than us and feel like comedic specters, which only added to the mysteries. As you progress, Bioshock Infinite tries to explain the alternate universal tears by using real-world scientific theory. While I'm no theoretical science nerd, I still appreciated the attempts at an explanation when so many games don't even care. Is everything the game presents scientifically accurate or even logical? No, it's a video game. But I still do like the rabbit hole goes deep. Do we know exactly how everything works? No, but there is plenty of lore and reasoning behind the audio logs and actual main narrative. Now, there are inconsistencies and weird things that do hurt the scientific presentation, like illogical alternate dimensional headaches and when Lady Comstock turned into a literal ghost. What sort of science was this? No clue. Again, I can ignore these things because the greater mysteries and secrets were so fun to uncover. The game had me guessing and unexpected things were happening left and right. Again, the final act is fantastic. We infiltrate a crazed insane asylum, view a dark future, speak with an alternate universe Elizabeth who is also a MILF conqueror, and we beat Comstock's head open and then drown him. Again, this last act is wild as hell, and it's not even close to being over. In the final showdown, we storm a Zeppelin and gain control of our bird friend, all while battling endless skyships and waves of automated enemies. As far as final battles go, Infinite delivers. After the carnage, Elizabeth is finally freed from her power restraints, and the game goes full tilt. Welcome to drugs, kids. This ending sequence seriously caught me off guard. First, we return to Rapture, which was amazing, then we are presented the multiverse of unlimited possibilities in the form of lighthouses. It's here that we learn the two devastating truths of Bioshock Infinite. Elizabeth is Booker's daughter, and Booker is in fact Comstock. Looking back, I think it's really cool that the game set these things up and then delivered on them. These revelations of course shock our main characters. Then comes the actual ending. In order to stop Comstock, or Booker, whatever you want to call him, Elizabeth does the only thing she can do. She gives Booker the worst baptism. That's right, she drowns him. When the credits rolled, my jaw was on the floor. I was expecting like a multiverse boss, like to fight a revengeful Comstock or army of Comstocks, but no. Infinite says, she's your daughter and you are Comstock. Think of these things in hell. Again, I loved the ending. It felt so brutal. Booker accepted his death, having finally faced the dreadful truth his mind had wanted to forget. It is a painful and haunting death, but a welcome one in some ways. It's very powerful to realize that by drowning our main character, we are in fact saving countless lives. That is the haunting beauty of Bioshock Infinite, the painful truth at its core. So, after fighting racist priests and drowning in the worst baptism in gaming history, I can say that Bioshock Infinite is in fact an enjoyable game. While the time for single-player narrative-driven games has seemingly passed us by, I think Bioshock Infinite shows that the game style shouldn't be a relic of the past. Hopefully games can continue on the style of games that it and other games of that era built. Despite the hardware limitations, the combat is fun, the world is breathtaking, the music is engaging, and the story sets up some epic moments. However, there are some flaws. Personally, I think the game should have been more open to the player, akin to a Dishonored, which in my opinion would have matched the setting more. And for multiple chapters, the game seemed like it had an inflated playtime as we focused on characters and narrative beats that became meaningless and distract from the actual good plot. Personally, I think this game highlights why the Bioshock franchise needs to make a return, whether it be a sequel or a remake. While I prefer the claustrophobic and dreaded atmosphere of Rapture, I still find the crazy citizens and scenery of Columbia to be great. So with all this being said, I would highly recommend Bioshock Infinite. Again, I thought it was great. So if there's any other games you want to see me try, leave them down in the comments. Have a good one.